I'm delighted to be joined now in the studio by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt. Lovely to see you again, Chancellor, so soon.
Good morning, Camilla.
Can we start? Do you mind if I ask you a personal question to begin with? Because I know cancer is something that's affected your family very deeply. You've lost your parents to cancer last year. You lost your beloved brother, Charlie. And I know you're running a London Marathon to raise money for the Royal Surrey Cancer Centre. And you've had your own cancer scare. So what was your reaction to the Princess of Wales's news?
Well, I think I had a lump in my throat like most people did, because, first of all, I think your heart goes out to anyone who's going through that. But I think the thing that really struck a chord was her talking about how difficult it was to talk to her own children. And I think that, most families do sadly have to face a cancer scare at some stage or another. And that's actually the most difficult thing of all. How do you tell your kids what's going on so that they are in the picture, but not over scared? And she's obviously been wrestling with that. And I think when she talked about that openly, which is a very brave thing to do, I think she connected with a lot of us.
Would your piece of advice to them then be to be as open as possible with the children?
I think it's not really for me to give advice to any other family because everyone is different. You've got kids, I've got kids. They're always smarter than you think they are. They do figure out what's going on. But it's also very, very scary. And so I think you just have to find a way, as she shared with the country, of giving them the hope that they need in situations like this. Well,
of course, we wish you well with your marathon. By the way, I know you're in the middle of training at the moment and on top of a very, very busy job. Let's talk about the budget then. I mean, are you happy with how it landed? Because the commentary has been that it hasn't really moved the dial, that Rishi Sunak and the Tories are still well behind in the polls, so it hasn't had the boost that you might have hoped.
Well, politicians always like to do well in the polls, but the job of a Chancellor is to do the right thing for the economy. And I think what we've seen this week after the budget, inflation going down to 3.4%. That shows that the difficult decisions that I took when I became Chancellor 18 months ago, really horrible decisions because we had inflation at over 11%. At that period, it wasn't just inflation, but people were very worried about living standards, and the Office for Budget Responsibility said they would fall by 2% in the following year. They've actually risen. So I think the economy is in much better shape than it might have been. And I think when it comes to the election, the real poll that politicians always say the only poll that really matters is the election, that's really a choice about the future. And when it comes to things like tax, what the Conservatives say is, yes, we had to put them up, but we think they should come down. We've made a start. We want to go further. Labour Party, Rachel Reeves, in her lecture this week, over an hour, she didn't mention once bringing down the tax burden.
Well, when should they come down? Because you're running out of time. I mean, will there be another fiscal event between now and the election?
I think that depends when the election is. And
you've suggested it might be in October.
Well, that's always been my working assumption, the Prime Minister's working assumption. So there would potentially be time for another one, but you can't say at this stage whether you're going to have the room to cut taxes further, because lots of things can change in the economy between now and then. But we do want people to know that, yes, we want to bring the tax burden down. And I think the important thing for GB News viewers is this isn't just about putting money in people's pockets, although people have been finding things tough. If you look around the world, places like North America and Asia with lower taxes grow faster. And if we want to be a dynamic economy, we don't want to go into that slow growth pattern that you so often get in countries where the tax burden has been hiked up.
But then the obvious question would be, why weren't you more radical with the budget? You talked about this idea of double taxation with income tax and national insurance. I was listening to you in the chamber thinking, my goodness me, it's going to scrap national insurance. You haven't gone that far, but afterwards you briefed that you might. I appreciate there's been the cut to national insurance, but you haven't cut income tax, and the tax bands remain frozen, so that we have this situation with thousands and thousands more people being fiscally dragged into higher tax rate bands. So you talk a good game when it comes to cutting tax, but you haven't actually cut tax, at least not income tax anyway.
Well, let's cut to the quick of this. I've been very honest with you, I think in our last interview, that yes, we put taxes up after the pandemic and the energy shock, and I haven't brought them all the way down to where they were before. And so you do have things like fiscal drag, but we have made a start, and 4p off national insurance for people in work. That'll be worth about £900 in the coming year. That's a start. But why didn't I go further, which is your question? With public finances where they are, the only way I could have gone further would have been to increase borrowing to fund tax cuts. And that wouldn't have been a real tax cut, because that would have been basically saying we're going to increase borrowing, we're going to send the bill to future generations, but it's not a real tax cut because someone else is picking up the tab. So I went as far as I could possibly go responsibly.
Although you talk about cutting tax, but if you look at the forecast by the OBR and indeed the IFS, they suggest that we're still going to be paying more tax in 5 years' time anyway, because of fiscal drag.
Well, what their numbers show actually is that because of the decisions I've taken, tax will be about 0.6% of a proportion of GDP lower than it would have been. And that includes, by the way, the tax rises that I did in the autumn statement 18 months ago. So put it all together, and actually we have started to reduce taxes from where they were going to be. But yes, I would like to bring the absolute levels of tax down, absolutely. And I've started on that path. Would you like
to scrap NI completely?
Yes, I would like employees.
When can you imagine being able to do that? If you offered that, for instance, in a fiscal event before the election, which was obviously be good electioneering, when would that feasibly be able to take place?
Well, I can't responsibly promise a date because it depends on all sorts of things, including, what Putin does in Ukraine and international energy prices. But what I can say is that for 2 fiscal events in a row, for the autumn statement and the budget, I have been able to make a significant cut in personal taxation without increasing borrowing, without risking our public services. And a Conservative government will go further because we've shown we can do it, and we'll continue on that journey.
Let's talk about a little bit of controversy that was caused by you in the week talking to somebody about a lady in Godalming talking about the eligibility for the government's childcare offer. And you made the point about one person earning over 100 grand a year. And you said that that was, quotes, not a huge salary in our area if you have a mortgage to pay. You're talking about being an MP in Surrey. 100 grand isn't a large amount of money to earn?
Well, I was talking to a lady who was explained to me the average house prices in that part of the world, £670,000. If you've got a mortgage, if you're paying childcare, what looks like a very high salary doesn't go as far as you might think it would. And but that's under 14 years of Tory rule, isn't it? I mean, 100 grand is 4 times more or less the average salary in this country. So that's a hell of a lot of money to earn, isn't it? Why are people on 100 grand feeling that they don't have enough money under a Conservative government? Well, sorry, I've got a cough. The reason is because we've been through a very difficult period. We've had a pandemic, we've had an energy crisis, and by the way, it's not just people on that salary, it's people on all salaries. If you look at the average salary in this country, £35,000, they have been feeling the pinch, and those people will see their tax bills go down by £900 this year. If you look at people on an even lower salary, the lowest legally payable salary, the national living wage, because I've increased that to £11.44, they will see, if they're working full-time, their income go up by £1,800. So that's the difference. Conservative government says that people at all parts of the income spectrum are finding life tough. We want to relieve that pressure. We're honest, we can't do it overnight, but we're making a start.
But isn't there a kind of cake and eat it scenario for the government here, in that you claim sort of plaudits for bringing inflation down, but you don't take responsibility for it having gone up in the first place?
Well, with respect, it's because it wasn't us, it was because of what Putin did in Ukraine that pushed up global energy prices. I will take responsibility for lots of things that we've gone wrong, but not the invasion of Ukraine.
If global energy prices have come down, and obviously the cost of living crisis has improved generally across the whole of the sort of global spectrum, then the idea of you personally claiming responsibility for these numbers coming down probably seems a bit disingenuous.
Well, I think you've talked to independent economists. They would say that the very difficult decisions I took in the autumn statement of 2022, when just after I become Chancellor, which did see those taxes going up, which did see public spending being cut, that meant that we had an environment where the Bank of England could focus on bringing down inflation with interest rates. And what economists say is fiscal and monetary policy needs to work together. And that's what I did. So I did have to play my part. Of course, it wasn't just me.
Final question on Putin, just because you mentioned him, this terror attack in Moscow. Are you worried now that the Russian president is going to use this to sort of weaponize further action against Ukraine? We've seen he's already blamed Ukraine, seemingly erroneously, for this attack.
Well, we know that we can't believe a word that man says. And, it's no surprise that he's trying to weaponize what happened. What I would say is that any innocent person, even if it's in Russia, a country whose government we disapprove of so strongly, it is a tragedy. And we are very lucky in this country that we have brilliant intelligence agencies, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, who managed to stop a lot of these attacks before they happen. But, our hearts go out to the families who've lost loved ones and what happened in Russia, but that doesn't mean we have to believe a word Putin says.
Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Camilla.